This method will utilize a special technique of factoring known as factoring by grouping. It resembles factoring when you have a leading coefficient of 1, which is not the case with what we have here because our leading coefficient is 6. This is what we call the AC method with factoring by grouping. So the first thing I'm going to do is identify what A is. I'm going to identify what C is. B is the number that's in the middle. So A in our case is 6, B equals 1, C is equal to negative 40. The first thing we're going to do is we're going to calculate A times C. So in our case, that's 6 times negative 40, which is negative 240. Our goal now is to find two numbers that when multiplied together, the product will be negative 240, but their sum will be the number that's in the middle. It's the B value, which in our case is 1. So we can find different numbers. I prefer just to find pairs of numbers that multiply to give me 240, and then their difference between them is going to be 1. We say the difference because we have a product that's a negative value. I'm going to list out the problem with this particular method is we get lots of possible factorizations. But because the difference is 1, you would want to look for numbers that are very close together. I'll list out several pairs of numbers that multiply to give us 240. We could have 1 and 240. We could have 2 and 120, 3 and 80, 4 and 60, 5 and 48, 6 and 40, 8 and 30. We're getting closer. 10 and 24. 12 and 20, and finally 15 and 16. Yes, that's a lot of possibilities. So that's one of the problems with this method. You might get some rather big numbers and have to do a lot. But remember, I said we were looking for two numbers whose product was negative 240, so one's going to have to be positive, one's going to have to be negative, that add to be positive 1. And these two numbers that we just found are going to do what we need them to do, 15 and 16. If I do a negative 15 and a positive 16, we'll get the numbers we're looking for. So what we're going to do is we're going to take the x that's in the middle. It doesn't matter which order you do, but we'll write 6x squared. And now that x, instead of writing it as x, we'll write it as, say, minus 15x plus 16x minus 40. So in the middle, negative 15x plus 16x would simplify to x. Now what we do is we pair up the first two terms and the last two terms. We group them together. So that'd be 6x squared minus 15x plus 16x minus 40. This method works because what's going to happen is we're going to find a common factor within each pair of parentheses, factor that out, and what's left inside the parentheses will be equal. So in 6x squared and 15x, we could factor out a 3x, leaving us with 2x minus 5. In 16x minus 40, the common factor is 8, so we can factor out a plus 8 there, leaving us with 2x minus 5. And just as I predicted, the 2x minus 5 is in common with both terms. And so we can factor that out. When we factor it out, what's going to be the other factor? It will be the 3x plus 8 that we have out in front. So our final answer will be 3x plus 8 multiplied by 2x minus 5. For our next example, we'll do the same thing. We'll identify what A, B, and C are. A is positive 4, B is 15, and C is negative 54. We'll form the product A times C, which in our case is going to be 4 times negative 54, which is negative 216. So we need two numbers whose product is negative 216, and their sum, once again, is going to be B, which in our case is positive 15. Once again, I like to find two positive numbers whose product is 216. And remember that because the product is negative, the difference should be positive 15. Once again, we'll take some time to list them out. 1 and 216, 2 and 108, 3 and 72, 4 and 54, 5 is not a factor, 6 and 36, 7 is not a factor, 8 would be 8 times 27, 9 and 24, and finally 12 and 18. We need two numbers that multiply to give us negative 216, add to give us positive 15, which means the difference between the pair of numbers that we select has to equal 15. And so we go searching for this, and in this particular case, 9 and 24 will do the job for us. Because it's a positive 15, it has to be negative 9 and positive 24. Those two add up to 15. Once again, what do? We take the trinomial we had, 4x squared, and instead of writing 15x in the middle, we'll write minus 9x plus 24x minus 54. Now we group them together in pairs. We're going to group the 4x squared together with the 9x. We're going to group the 24x with the 54. And then, within each pair of parentheses, we find what we can factor out. From 4x squared minus 9x, all we have is an x. So we'll end up with 4x minus 9. By design, the next one, when we factor things out, should have a 4x minus 9 inside the parentheses. 24 and 54 have a common factor of 6. If I put 6 there, we end up with 4x minus 9. Once again, by design, this works because the things in the parentheses are equal to each other. When we factor out the 4x minus 9, we'll be left with x plus 6. So our final answer is x plus 6 multiplied by 4x minus 9. For our next example, we have 12x squared plus 92x plus 15. One thing that we should be checking is we should be checking to see if there are any common factors between the three terms. 12 and 92 have a common factor of 2, 15 does not. 12 and 15 have a common factor of 3, but 92 is not divisible by 3, so these have no common factors. We identify what A, B, and C are. A is 12, B is 92, and C is 15. We find the product A times C. That's 12 times 15, which is 180. Then we want to find a pair of numbers whose product is 180 and add up to 92. Now, why do we say add up? Because the product is a positive 180 here. The number in the middle is also positive, so we want to add up to 92. So we want the product to equal positive 180, and we want the sum to equal 92. Now you might already see what this pair of numbers is. If you don't, you can just start to go through the list. 180, 2 and 90, 3 and 60, 4 and 45, 5 and 36, 6 and 30. Boy, there are a lot of these. 10 or 9 and 20, 10 and 18. We're getting close. You can see as we get larger, smaller factors, the numbers get closer and closer. We've got 12 and 15, and that should be it. We want a pair of numbers whose product is 180 and sum is 92. And in this case, we end up with the pair 2 and 90. We want both of them to be positive. Again, what we do is we put the 2 and 90, we express that as 92x is 2x plus 90x. And then we have a plus 15 at the end. We can group these, 12x squared plus 2x plus 90x plus 15. We find out what's in common with each pair of, or each set of numbers in parentheses. 12x squared and 2x has a common factor of 2x. When we factor that out, we get 6x plus 1. 90x and 15. Now here's a little hint. I think we should be able to factor something out and get 6x plus 1. What would we need to factor from 90 to get 6? We would need to divide it by 15. So if we factor 15 out of there, we get 6x plus 1. When we look at what's in the parentheses, 6x plus 1 is the common factor between those two terms. We can factor that out, and we'll end up with 6x plus 1 in the back or at the front, depending on where you want to do it. What comes out in the front? Well, there, we take what's on the outside, 2x plus 15. And so that's the factorization. One more. Here we notice that each term has a factor of x in it, so we definitely want to factor that out. I also notice that 18, 136, and 64 are divisible by 2. So I'll need to factor out at minimum a 2x. If I don't see what else I can factor out, after I've factored out the 2x, I'll check again to see if there's anything in common. So if I factor out 2x, we end up with 9x squared plus 68x minus 32. Now, when we're talking about the a, b, and c, we're going to talk about the a, b, and c of what's inside. I might also want to check, do these have a common factor? Well, 9 has factors of 1, 3, and 9. 68 is not divisible by 3 or 9, neither is 32. So this is as much as we can factor out. So in this case, when we do the AC method, we're going to multiply A is 9, B is 68, and C is negative 32. A times C is going to be 9 times negative 32, which is negative 288. We want to find a pair of numbers whose product is negative 288, but whose sum is the B value, which in this case is 68. We can try lots of different things here, but remember, because the product is negative, the difference between the two numbers that we are going to write down, we're going to write down factors of 288, the difference is going to have to equal 68. I'm going to list out a few of them, and then I'll target, as we go, I'll think about what the differences are. So I could try 1 and 288. The difference there is 287. That doesn't work. 2 and 144. The difference there is 142. 3 and 96. The difference between those two is 93. 4 and 72. The difference between those two numbers is 68. I've just found it. So I want negative 4 and positive 72, because when I add those two numbers together, I get positive 68. When I multiply them, I get the negative 288. Remember that this is what we're factoring, the 9x squared plus 68x minus 32. So I'm going to write the 68x in the middle as 72x minus 4x. Let's do that. So I've got 2x squared, or 2x. I've got 9x squared. Again, I could write it as minus 4x plus 72x, or I could write it as plus 72x minus 4x. I want to illustrate something here. And then we have the minus 32. Now notice the value overall is the same as it was before. 9x squared and minus 32 were still there. The 68x in the middle is now written as 72x minus 4x. Now we're going to group the two numbers in pair, or the four numbers into two pairs. So we have 2x, and so this is all done in the parentheses. I have 9x squared plus 72x. And I'm going to put a little plus there, plus then I'll do negative 4x minus 32. From the first set of parentheses, the 9x squared plus 72x, I have a common factor of 9. So 2x, if I pull out a 9, I can also pull out an x. We'll be left with x plus 8. Now notice inside the parentheses, it's x plus 8, plus x plus 8. In the second set of parentheses, I have a minus and a minus. So what I want to do is I want to make sure that the signs match when I make my factorization. 4 and 32 have a common factor of 4, but let's pull out a minus 4. When I do that, that'll leave me with, once again, x plus 8. Inside the parentheses, we see we have x plus 8 twice. So when we factor, we'll factor out an x plus 8. What will remain will be the 9x minus 4. So our final answer is 2x multiplied by 9x minus 4 times x plus 8.